Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this installment of the Hagen History Center's Spring 2022 Speaker Series. I'm Jeff Sherry, Museum Educator. Our speaker tonight is Gwendolyn White. Gwen's talk tonight, is entitled Traveling Through Time, Finding Those Who Came Before Me. They're no longer here, but they are not gone. It's about the journey. Before I turn it over to Gwen, just a few announcements from the Hagen History Center. We're currently open to the public 6 days a week from 10 to 5, featuring new exhibits in the Watson Curtsey Mansion, the Wood Morrison House, and Frank Lloyd Wright's original San Francisco office, and other architectural exhibits in our brand new exhibit building. Our staff has created many blogs and videos that are available on our website at www.eriehistory.org. And we encourage you to check those out regularly. Since her move to Erie in 1985 from Lexington, Kentucky, Gwendolyn White has served with passion with many civic and nonprofit organizations and received the 2019 Alex de Tocqueville Award. She was honored with the 2021 Applause Award from Erie Arts and Culture. She is an underwriting manager for Erie Insurance and is currently on special assignment as a fellow for the CEO Action Racial Equality Fellowship. She's vice chair of the PA Humanities and chairperson for the Erie County Convention Center Authority. She's a docent and board member at the Hagen History Center. Member of the African American Genealogical Group of Kentucky, the National Genealogical Society, and the Indiana African American Genealogical Group. Gwendolyn is a proud mother of a son, 3 grandchildren. She enjoys life, reading, traveling, photography, and genealogy. Everyone, Gwen White.
Good evening. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Gwen. Gwen, I was going to ask you, I see from your biography that you have you're a volunteer and have served on many nonprofits and charitable organizations. What's your motivation for doing that?
Well, Jeff, it varies. I think the bottom line is I feel that we are obligated to take care of each other. And my work on the different groups allows me to do that in a variety of fashion. We are our brother's keeper.
Yes, we are. Well, why don't you begin and tell us about your childhood growing up in Kentucky?
Okay. Well, it was not, it was actually a great childhood, looking back and comparing it. I am the oldest of 4, and I remind my siblings every day that I am the oldest. My parents were Donald and Flora Mitchell, who were born and raised in Lexington. I had a pretty normal, whatever the definition of normal is, as a child growing up, did all the things that I wasn't supposed to do. But I also was well taken care of and well loved. I guess that's what I'll sum it up. I was well loved growing up.
Good. Well, why don't you tell us your story?
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate you being here and listening to my journey and listening to the stories that I am going to share. We're going to travel through time, and the slide that you have up here now, the young girl is my mom at age 7. And the 2 little girls, the young girl sitting on the stool is my great aunt Louise, and the young girl standing next to her is my grandmother. So we're going to travel back to see what life was like with them and see what we can learn.
All right.
Before we get started, I wanted to share with you the Sinkofa concept. And Sinkofa is an African concept, meaning we should retrieve things of value from our knowledge of the past. What exactly is Sinkofa? It is a principle derived from the Akan people of Ghana that one should remember the past to make positive progress in the future. The Akan tribe of Ghanaian Africans is part of the larger Ashanti group of people from West Africa. The word Sinkofa literally means to retrieve in the Akan language, but the meaning of Sinkofa is more broadly expanded upon in this Akan proverb. And I won't repeat the proverb you see here because I cannot speak the language, but I will tell you what it means. It is not taboo to go back and fetch what you forgot. The power of Sinkofa centers around this. To know history and your heritage is to know your current self, the world around you, and how to better that world. Sinkofa has also inspired both activism and art. African American studies and Africana studies often reference the spirit and substance in Sinkofa. And filmmakers and musicians and artists have used the term and its related imagery in their work. From its Ghanaian roots, the concept and its symbols have become part of Pan-African and even worldwide in its influence. And there are two symbols. What you're seeing here is the metaphorical symbol used by the Akan people of Ghana. Generally, it's depicted as a bird with its head turned backwards, taking an egg from its back. It expresses the importance of reaching back to knowledge gained in the past and bringing it into the present to make positive progress. Again, I appreciate you listening tonight, and I am honored that I was asked to share part of my story, especially in celebration of Black History Month. I wanted to honor Langston Hughes, and on my screen, what I should have said to you earlier too, I'm also technology challenged. As far as maneuvering through the technology. So part of my talk is blocked out here. But in honor of Langston Hughes' birthday, which was yesterday, and celebration of Black History Month, we're going to travel through time with his ancestry. James Mercer Langston Hughes was an American poet and social activist, novelist, playwright, and columnist from Joplin, Missouri. The picture you have here is a picture out of one of our Gatewoods family reunions booklet, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in the presentation. But this is one of my favorite poems of Langston Hughes that I want to share with you. Still here, I've been scorned and battered, my hopes the wind done scattered, snow has frizzed me, sun has baked me, looks like between them they done tried to make me stop laughing, stop loving, stop living, but I don't care. I am still here. Like many African Americans, Langston Hughes had a complex ancestry. Both of Hughes' paternal great-grandmothers were enslaved Africans, and both of his paternal great-grandfathers were white slave owners in Kentucky. According to Hughes, one of these men was Sam Clay, a Scottish-American whiskey distiller of Henry County, said to be a relative of the statesman Henry Clay. The other putative paternal ancestor, whom Hughes' name was Silas Cushenberry, a slave trader of Clark County. Hughes wrote that Cushenberry was a Jewish slave trader, but a study of the Cushenberry family genealogy in the 19th century has found no Jewish affiliation. Hughes' paternal grandmother, Mary Patterson, was one of African-American, French, English, and Native American descent. One of the first women to attend Oberlin College, she married Louis Sheridan Leary, also of mixed race, before her studies. Louis Leary subsequently joined the John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in West Virginia in 1859, where he was fatally wounded. 10 years later, in 1869, the widow Mary Patterson Leary married again into the elite, politically active Langston family. Her second husband was Charles Henry Langston, of African American, Euro-American, and Native American ancestry. He and his younger brother, John Mercer Langston, worked for the abolitionist cause and helped lead the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society in 1858. After their marriage, Charles Langston moved with his family to Kansas, where he was active as an educator, activist for voting and voting rights for African Americans, as well as others. His and Mary's daughter, Caroline, who became known as Carrie, became a school teacher and married James Nathaniel Hughes. They had 2 children. The second was Langston Hughes, born in 1901, again in Joplin, Missouri. Tonight, we're going to travel through time as I know it with Boone Miller, my grandmother Alberta, my dad Donald, Tom J. and Mary Gatewood, the Gatewood family reunions, Tom Bradley and Ann Miller, Allie and Moses Mitchell, and cousin Lydia Taylor McIntyre. I've always been interested in people's stories, even as a kid. Although I didn't realize this for quite some time, I was born into my family with a mission or calling to tell our story. And I should say our stories. As with you, our family stories are varied. At the end of our session tonight, hopefully you will get to know me and a little more about my journey in finding those who came before me. I will share some resources that I've come to rely on and that works for me. At the end, I hope to answer questions. That is, if I know the answer, and if I don't know the answer, I'll try to find it and post it later. If any of you know the answer, feel free to post it to the site. How you find your stories and how you tell your stories and how you find your ancestors is different for all of us. What you do with your information will be different for all of us. It is about the journey for each of us. Some of you are more organized than I am. I am still learning lessons in how to reach out to my ancestors and how to be available when they reach out to me. There are times I rediscover information I already had. There have been times I've lost information and unable to find it again. I have had missed opportunities. While I have been on this journey for quite some time, I'm still learning the how of finding my ancestors and the how to listen to them when they're reaching out to be heard or recognized. I'm learning to listen and not just hear, being mindful that just because they're not here, they are not gone. A few tips to think about if you're just starting out in your search of finding those who came before you. Collect family memories. Finding information at home, I found some information in reading family Bibles with pertinent family history, such as date of birth, date of deaths. I found notes, documents in deceased relatives' belongings and in the belongings of those still alive. You also can look in previous research that has been done. Some of the information that I found in others' research and records and was able to validate it as part of my story through others' records. Collect oral histories. Over the years, I have written about conversations I've had with family members and others. I've interviewed family members and recorded some of their interviews. However, this is an area of missed opportunities for me. And I'll share a little bit more about that later. Also, spend time with outside research and at libraries. I have spent countless hours at the Lexington Public Library. Whenever I would visit home, which was Lexington, I included scheduled time to hang out at the Heritage Room at the library. This time included reading through death and marriage records, scrolling through newspapers, reading other documented stories, looking at maps and other documents that I can't even recall now. What I do remember is that when my day ended of gathering information, I always returned to my dad's home, excited to share new revelations and sometimes just interesting information, especially if the research pertained to his family line. I eventually secured a Lexington Public Library card to be able to go online to research when I wasn't in Lexington. Both of my parents were excited and curious about finding our ancestors and provided not only encouragement, but in many cases assisted greatly in connecting the dots. Sometimes my discoveries would prompt their memories of something they had forgotten about and or solved a mystery or an unknown for them. October 1930, Boone Miller, my second great-grandfather, dies at Eastern State Asylum Hospital, Lexington, Kentucky. This is his death certificate. Boone was 73 years of age. Eastern State Hospital, Lexington, Kentucky, the second oldest such hospital in the nation, was established in 1824 and is still in operation. How does Boone end up at the hospital for the insane? Was he insane, or was he just a victim of medical knowledge of his time? Boone's death certificate lists his cause of death as arteriosclerosis. More than likely, Boone's diminished capacity due to hardening of the arteries and aging account for his last days at the hospital. His stay there seems to have been about 14 months. He was a widow at the time. His birthplace is listed as Madison County, Kentucky. However, his parental information is not listed. He was buried in Richmond, Kentucky at the Maple Grove Cemetery, and he died October 23rd and was buried on October 26th. Boone's life began before the end of that peculiar institution and before the beginning of the war between the states. In 1870, he is listed as being 14 years old in the federal census. With this census and subsequent census, his year of birth seems to be either 1855 or 1856. However, you see here, his death certificate lists his year of birth as 1857. His parents were Martha Miller and Zach Miller. Zach Miller is listed on his sister Cowley's death certificate as being her father. I'm taking license at this moment to assume Zach Miller was Boone's father as well. While Martha is found later in many other documents, Zach there are no findings for Zach. In the 1880 federal census, Martha is listed as a widow. In a family research project completed by attorney William Lobach of Lexington, Kentucky, it is noted that Martha Miller and her children, that included Boone, lived and worked on the farm owned by his family. This family had been slave owners before the war that ended in 1865. I'm assuming the Millers had been the property of the Chenaults during the dark days of our nation. Boone married Katie Shearer in June of 1877. During that time, marriage bonds were required. Jacob Shearer was the surety and Boone was the principal. Neither Boone or Jacob could read or write, so they made their mark in the appropriate area on the bond. Boone and Katie lived most of their lives in Madison, Kentucky. Boone later lived in Clark County, where he owned his dwelling and worked at a lumber mill. Boone and Katie's children were Maddie, who married William, Ida, who married Everett, Cora, Katie, who married a gay, Callie, who married Edgar, and Ovia, who married Flora, and Albert, my great-grandfather, who married Janie Mae Coleman, my great-grandmother. Alberta, my grandmother, my father's mother, my son's great-grandmother, my grandchildren's great-great-grandmother. Alberta Elizabeth Miller was born July 22nd, 1914 in Dayton, Ohio, to parents Albert and Janie Coleman Miller. Janie's parents were John and Elizabeth Coleman. Albert's parents were Boone and Katie. Boone's parents were Zach and Martha. Alberta was the oldest of 3 children. She was raised and lived most of her life in Lexington, Kentucky. She spent some time living in Louisville around 1942. Cora Louise, which is my Aunt Louise, my great Aunt Louise, and John Boone, who we called Uncle Sonny, were her sister and brother. She was close to her mother's parents, who lived at 446 Michigan Avenue. Throughout her years of growing up, it appears that she spent a great time living there. I assume Alberta had a close to normal life growing up. She once told me that Rudolph Valentino was her favorite movie star. Rudolph Valentino was born May 6, 1895, and died August 23, 1926. He was an Italian actor based here in the United States who starred in several well-known silent films. She told me once that she won a spelling bee when she was younger. My mother-in-law told my dad that she knew my grandmother and my Aunt Louise when they were younger, and that my grandmother didn't want for anything. She had the impression my grandmother and her family were well off. And actually, several people who knew them and their families said the Colemans were the elite of the day. They had the best of everything. Their assessment of the Colemans and the Millers may have been a relative evaluation, considering the overall economic conditions and social status of most African Americans or coloreds of that day. By all accounts, Alberta was a beautiful young girl who was very bright and enjoyed life. My dad once told me that when he was a little boy, he remembers looking at my grandmother and thinking how beautiful she is. She met and married Wallace Mitchell, son of Newton Sally Wallace Mitchell. Alberta and Wallace had 2 sons, Carl and Wallace Jr., who died in infancy before my dad was born. Alberta was 20 years old when my dad, Donald, was born. And it appears that by the late 1930s or early 1940s, she and Wallace had separated or divorced. According to a letter from her mother, Janie, Alberta and Louise were living in Louisville in 1942. My dad, Donald, was staying with his grandparents, Albert and Janie. Actually, it appears my dad spent a great deal of time with his grandparents and great-grandparents during these years. This is a page, right here, the first page is the inside of my grandmother's accounting book when she was in the 10th grade, and it was a biography she wrote of herself. And I'll share a little bit more information about what's on here, because it's a little, probably a little hard to see. At the time of Alberta's birth, Alberta and Janie were living in Dayton, Ohio. Albert was a coach cleaner at the depot, which was probably the train station, and Janie was listed as a housewife on Alberta's birth certificate. Janie was 17 years old and Albert was 22 years old. Albert and Janie may have been living in Dayton in search of job opportunities, but they eventually moved back to Lexington and settled there for the rest of their lives. John and Elizabeth Coleman, Janie's parents, may have also lived in Dayton during this time. They were not listed in the Lexington City Directory during 1914 and 1915. And John Coleman also had relatives living in Dayton. At age 16, Alberta was living at 446 Michigan Avenue at the home of her grandparents. She attended Dunbar High School and was in the 10th A grade at the time. Her homeroom teacher was Mrs. K.J. Haskins. The principal was Professor W.H. Faust. Her boyfriend was a W. Maxbury. And if you see here, down here, kind of middle, halfway down on the page, she has a line drawn through W.H. Maxbury, and she has a note on here, and it says, "No more." So apparently they broke up. Don't know whether she was heartbroken or not. But again, she's telling of herself, with this. I imagine her sitting in accounting class, writing in the back of the book, daydreaming, and probably looking at everything else but the accounting teacher. Her favorite song was "Crying Myself to Sleep." Her male friends had the initials, as you can see here, of JS, DS, MR, WJ, and AB. Her girlfriend had the initials of MW, CH, RI, and EP. I'm gonna take you ahead to a screen. This is the song, the sheet music. I ordered this sheet music when I found the information about her bio. And this is the song and the music for "Crying Myself to Sleep." And do not worry, I cannot sing, so I won't attempt to sing this song to you. Just wanted to share with you, other ways that you can create your stories and find information out about your relatives and friends. The letter here next that you see here is a letter from her grandmother. And she writes here that she's telling Alberta and her sister Louise are living in Louisville. And she's like saying, like, the letter, I was glad to hear from you. And, wishing her well as far as finding the job. And she makes a comment that, I'm alone and sleepy. You and Louise, be good. Do whatever I tell, be what I told you. And Janie Mae Janie Mae is doing well. And then she says that the boys are doing well. And then Alberta called her grandmother Coleman. And actually my dad called his great-grandmother Coleman. And these are information, these are pieces of documentation that I found in the belongings of my grandmother, actually after she passed away. I assume Alberta knew her father's father, Boone, because Boone didn't die until 1930, when Alberta was 16 years old. She didn't speak about him to me. She didn't talk about her grandparents either. What I know about them, other than my research, came from my dad's experience with them. In a letter from, and actually I just shared this with you, in a letter from Elizabeth Coleman to her granddaughter, it seems as though she and Alberta were very close. There probably were many exchanges of letters between them. And as from this letter, Elizabeth responded to Alberta's letter in warmth and interest. And she states that the children are well. My dad and his cousin Bobby, which is Aunt Louise's son, was staying with Janie and Albert, probably on Bradley Court. Alberta was in Louisville, along with her sister Louise. Alberta and Louise were very close. My Aunt Louise was especially fond of my dad. Louise called her sister Bert. In 1936, Alberta worked for the Liggett Myers Tobacco Company according to her Social Security application. She was living at 513 Black Avenue with her husband Wallace and their young son, my dad. She was 22 years old. Later in life, Alberta worked as a housekeeper or a maid for the Kentucky Anna Hotel located on High Street. And I recall many times picking her up, going with my dad. Sometime after Alberta's separation or divorce from Wallace, she met Cleave Singleton. Cleave and Alberta lived together on Upper Street prior to Cleave entering the Army. He entered the Army as a private first class. Daddy remembers that as a little boy, Cleave was always nice to him and purchased a bicycle for him. When Cleave was in the Army and stationed in Italy, Cleave would send my dad money. After Cleave returned from overseas and was discharged from the Army, Alberta and Cleave married. Cleave was a stabilizing force in my dad's life, and this is the marriage certificate that I was able to retrieve for Cleave and Alberta. My grandmother Alberta seemed to enjoy life. I always felt loved and special in her presence. I remember our trips to downtown Lexington. We would walk from her house on Race Street most of the time. I don't remember exactly what we did downtown. I just recall the walks. There is one memory, though, that I do fondly recall. I was a teenager, and the 4th of July was fast approaching. As with the custom, everyone looked forward to a new outfit. My girlfriend, Carolyn Jean, and I was shopping at the Learner's Department Store on Main Street, and we came across these matching gray and white striped outfits. Carolyn Jean had enough money to purchase hers, but I didn't. I had to have that cotton outfit. I did not hesitate to go to a nearby phone booth, call my grandparents, and tell them of my dilemma. Within what seemed like a few moments from my SOS call, they met me downtown and gave me enough money to purchase that outfit. Every time I wore that outfit for the season, I thought about Alberta and Cleave coming to my rescue. While that outfit did not only lasted for that summer, their act and responsiveness to my need lasted forever. I never doubted or never thought I wasn't special to them. I probably took it for granted. I spent a lot of time with Alberta and Cleave growing up. I loved chocolate cream pie, and Cleve's sister, Flora, made delicious chocolate cream pie. There were times during my visit with Alberta and Cleave, they would send me to the refrigerator to find something for me. I remember Alberta and Cleave smiling at each other, and I can still feel the essence in the room over my joy and pleasure of finding that chocolate cream pie. It wasn't just the taste of the pie, but it was the specialness I felt that they got this pie just for me because they knew I was coming by. I visualized those and other moments that took place often during my childhood and growing up years. Alberta left this earth on Sunday, November 10th, 1985. I was stunned. Although she was in the hospital and had been several times before, I was devastated. I talked to my dad on that Saturday before, and he told me she was probably going home on the next day, Sunday. Sunday morning, when my sister called, my sister Alba, to tell me Alberta had passed away, I was in shock. I never thought about the possibility of my grandmother dying. We lost Cleave in 1981. Even with his leaving us, I never thought about Alberta's passing. I lost other loved ones, but somehow losing her was too soon. There were so many things that I needed to talk to her about. There were questions that did not exist until many years later. There were things that I didn't know that I wanted to ask her. I moved to Erie in May of 1985. My relocation actually took place on advice from Alberta. When I received the job offer to move to Erie, I was hesitant about my leaving my familiar surroundings, the comfort of my family, and the removing of my son, who was 13 at the time, out of his environment. I shared my concerns with Alberta as I thought things through. Alberta didn't often tell me what to do, but this time she offered some advice. She reminded me how unhappy I was with my job and how much I wanted to do something different. She went on to remind me that in 5 years, my son would be 18 years old and going on to a direction of his own. She told me that while it was important that I consider him in my decision-making, I should not let that cloud the issue or be a determining factor. She told me I needed to, she told me that I needed to ask myself what was I going to do in 5 years after Des Moines was moving on with his life if I don't take this opportunity. She also told me that if she thought that Des Moines was not stable enough to make that move away from Lexington and family, she would tell me. In her closing comments about my decision, she stated very clearly, go check it out. If it doesn't work out, you know your daddy and I will come and get you. And so I made the decision to move to Erie. I realized how much my grandmother came to reflect on the meaning of time. To me, a year or 5 years was an infinite long time. To Alberta, time was relative and fleeting. She knew and had experienced that 5 years was just a moment. She knew I needed to explore and live my life. When I lived in Lexington, I saw my grandmother at least 3 or 4 times a week, not including the Sunday dinners at her house after church with my dad. When I moved to Erie, I missed those connections immediately. However, I did talk to her at least once a week. I last saw her in July of that year. I had settled in Erie and came to Lexington to pick up my son, who had been staying with my mom since May. Over the years since Alberta's passing, there have been times when I wanted to pick up the phone to call her and let her know what I've been up to. Somehow, though, I feel I don't need to do that, and I'm not bothered that I cannot do that because she knows what I've been up to. She knows, and all those who came before her knows. And these are the discharge papers of my grandfather, Cleave. And this is Cleave in his uniform. And I wanted to share a spot here, and we'll talk about this too a little bit later, that you have a common community of people who are researching to tell their stories of their families. And I have a very good friend, Tom Luzio, who has been researching his Italian and German background. And we connected probably about 25, if not 30 years ago. We worked together and became very good friends. And through our research, there are times, we run into brick walls. Sometimes we're looking at information and we can't see it. Like I say, you can't see the trees for the forest. I can't see the forest for the trees. There would be information that I would research for Tom and information Tom would research for me. Well, the point I want to make here is, you see this patch that's on my grandfather's uniform. It's a devil with a pitchfork. My grandfather was with the Tuskegee Airmen, but he was a mechanic. And we come to find out, and this was I was being helped with Tom, because Tom is an expert on World War II and everything about it. And he searched forever for information about the patch, as well as some other information about, World War II that was very beneficial for me for my research. But I just wanted to give a shout out to Tom, because I think Tom is listening tonight, and say, hey, Tom, I miss seeing you, at the office. This is a copy of a newspaper page that during my research that I uncovered during my time at the Lexington Public Library. And I bring this up. This here is the funeral notice of my grandfather, Albert, who died in 1949. And if you see down here, there's a section here that says colored notes. And this is information about, the African Americans, and I'll use the word, Negroes during that time in Lexington. Their news and information was separate from the whites in the newspaper. I found a lot of information as far as activity, what was going on, because a lot of the information was isolated under the color notes. I just want to share a little bit about the history about the color notes for you. This was a column that was found in mainstream newspapers throughout the United States. It contained information about African Americans. The column was often located on the back pages of the want ads. The articles ranged in length from a few sentences to an entire column or more. The term colored circles were used in the late 1890s and began using the term colored notes around 1904. And in Lexington, this had been used since 1921. The colored notes were handled by the colored department of the Lexington Herald newspaper, and that department was housed in a separate location in the African community between 1925 and 1937. In the late 1950s, there was opposition to the term and the use of the word colored and the segregating of the news in Lexington's newspapers. In the early 1960s, CORE and other civil rights organizations demanded that the notation colored notes be removed and that the news about African Americans be incorporated with all other news. On the opposing side, though, there was a push by some to keep the news separate, including African Americans who felt that if the colored notes disappeared, then journalism would return to the days when there was no news at all about African Americans in the mainstream newspapers. The Lexington newspapers were not inclined to remove colored notes, so the heated debate continued. And then finally, in 1964, they removed the colored notes. It would take another 5 years of disagreement before the newspapers would begrudgingly relent. And that term was finally removed and discontinued. This is my dad as a little boy, as a teenager. And just want to share a letter that my dad wrote to my grandmother while he was away at college. Just a short note. Hey, hello, Mom. This is February the 7th, 1954. Just a short note to let you know at the moment. I'm doing okay. Tell Cleave hello. Have you heard from Bobby yet? I wrote a letter, but I haven't received an answer. By the time you receive this letter, it would be February the 9th. I probably will be nervous all that day. February the 9th. His first daughter, was born February the 19th. I was due February the 9th, but it took me 10 days to get here. My dad was away at college. How is Louise? Did Flora May call you up, which is my mom? She says she was. Well, I will write more next time, so I will close. Give my love to Louise, but you also keep it too. Love you both. How do you feel to have a son in college? I often wonder. Love, Don. Again, another side of life. Mary Gatewood Smith. Mary Gatewood. Mary was born in 1859. The parents, Sarah and William Smith. She married Thomas Jefferson Gatewood, November 28th, 1878 in Scott County. And she and Thomas Jefferson Gatewood were the parents of Sudie, Sadie, Bessie, Mamie, Nanny, Remus, Edward, Ernest, and Elmer. And I already said Amos. Sadie was my great-grandmother. This is a copy of a census from 1870. And this highlights my great-great-grandfather, Thomas J., in 1870, was living with his mom and his stepfather and two sisters. And I just wanted to highlight, again, one of the records that you can find information is looking through the census. This is a copy of the marriage records for Thomas and Mary. From this record, not only did I find the date of their marriage, but I also found the parents of Mary. And they were Sarah and William, and Thomas and Mary are the first names on the marriage book. One of the things that I want to remind you as you're researching and finding information, make sure that you source your material as you get the material. I learned some lessons the hard way early on of finding information, but did not source them. So I had to go back and research again to bring the information up. This is a picture of the Gatewoods family reunion that was first held in October 1946. This, as part of my research and my journey, I just wanted to share with you a copy. I found some pictures and documents in my great-grandmother's possessions, and there were pictures that were not named or titled. And so with some of my relatives, what I did, I sent a letter, as you can see here on the right, asking people to identify the people if they could and send them back to me, as well as asking for documentation and photos that they may have, some of my cousins. But I wanted to read this letter here from one of my cousins, Bud. And it says, "Dear Gwen, I viewed all of their pictures and I didn't recognize anyone. These people were living long before my time. They all looked depressed. Back in those days, they had a right to be. Times were hard and I had to deal with a lot. I don't know how they survived, but they did. Sorry I couldn't be of help. Love, Bud." And Bud was my mom's first cousin. And this is some pictures that were, I did have some relatives to identify. This lady here is my great-grandmother Sadie in her younger days, and my great-grandfather Eugene. These are some snapshots of some of the family reunions that we've had over the years. Another great place for resourcing of information, lots of conversations takes place. This is a family reunion that my son and my two granddaughters hosted in Maryland a few years ago. I am the, I guess I should say the family historian for this particular line of our family of the Gatewoods. And like I said, we were established November 28, 1878 through the marriage of Thomas and Mary Gatewood. And this is part of a traveling museum that I have put together over the years that we set out every year at the reunion to learn new facts, to be reminded of other facts. And there's conversation going on around as they look and talk to each other. I put this picture here. I also mentioned that I have recorded conversations. This is my cousin, Billy, and Billy was actually my grandmother's first cousin. And this is a picture when Billy was younger with his grandparents who raised him. And this man here is my Uncle Elmer, who was my great-grandmother's brother and one of the 10 kids of Thomas and Mary. Alice and Moses Mitchell married in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, the 19th of December, 1873. And since the time of the writing about Alice and Moses, I have met Moses's ancestor, but tonight does not permit me to share with you the journey. But I've taken Moses's ancestors back to the 1790s. And it was serendipitous of how I found information about that. Is it a case of murder? Wife of Moses, Mitchell, makes an ugly charge against John McNeil. Says her husband died as a proper result of blows struck by McNeil with a stone in a fight. Pending an investigation, which may result in a charge of breach of peace now launched against him being changed to one of murder, John McNeil, a Negro employed by J.W. Appleton, was committed to jail by Justice Bell in default of $1,000 bond. The case is one of the most peculiar that has come to the notice of the local authorities in many a day. Alice and Mose Mitchell are my dad's great grandparents. On April 21st, Moses Mitchell, a colored carpenter living at 452 North Limestone, appeared before Justice Bell and had issued 3 warrants against John McNeil, charging a breach of peace. One alleged breach was an assault on Mitchell, another in an attack with a knife, and a third was an assault on Mitchell's 12-year-old boy, Newton Mitchell, who was my great-grandfather. The warrants were placed in the hands of the county detective, but was not served until 2 weeks later when they located McNeil and arrested him. Before the trial could be held, though, Mitchell, who was in poor health, died and was buried last Saturday. Now comes Alice Mitchell, the wife of the dead man, who claims to have been an eyewitness to the fight between her husband and McNeil, and tells a story, which is, if it's true, has put a new phase on the case and lends color to the suspicion that Mitchell's death a few days later may have been caused by blows received at the hands of McNeil. The prosecution is investigating the woman's story, and subsequent development may result in the charge. This was information that I gathered out of a newspaper. I was looking for information for someone else on a different event, and as I was reading through this particular time, I came across Alice Mitchell's name, and I thought, oh, I have a relative named Alice Mitchell. Let me do a little bit more reading. So subsequent articles helped me to tie up that this was actually my great-grandmother. And so I followed it, searched the articles throughout. For this particular case, and I won't read you the whole story, but it was an interesting story of what she said happened. McNeil was found not guilty. Later on, Ali was charged by the court for breach of peace, and she had to pay, I think it was a sum of $5 at the time. And so, which was, interesting. The articles that you see here on the page is the death certificate for Moses. He died in 1906, May 9th. And then the death certificate for Ali. She died in 1911. The other 2 newspaper articles here, one is Ali, well, they called her Ali. She was charged with attacking a school, and I hesitate when I say this because it was a school janitor that had apparently whipped her son Newton, my great-grandfather, and she took him to court. In that particular case, she lost out on the court case and then had to pay again the court fines for this. And then also down here, there was a court order to commit Ali to an asylum, which was Eastern State, of actually where my great-great-grandfather Boone had died. And so this is information to help me piece together the story. And there's lots of other things that have gone in that I have come to find out about Ali that I found through my research. When you think about, this is the African American Cemetery in Lexington, and this is the headstone for Moses and Ali, where they're buried. This are my cousins, T.B. Miller, and my nephew, Julian Clark, and my cousin, Ann Miller. And before I share a little bit of their story, I know we're kind of coming up on time. I just want to share some other suggestions about, storytelling when you're talking about your ancestors' tale. So there's no limit to the ways that we can tell our stories. First, think beyond the written word. You can share with pictures. It doesn't have to be in writing. Do whatever works for you. Provide a historical backdrop. Document an epic journey. Use apps to create and edit. Keep it short and sweet. I do want to share an article that I wrote with you, leaving one of the Gatewoods family reunions. This was sitting outside the rest stop in Cleveland on I-71. Just left the 2005 family reunion. Well, actually, maybe not just left. It was 3 hours ago. As always, the trip home allows me for reflection, analyzation, questioning, and introspection. While each family gathering brings its own dynamics, the interactions and reactions don't change much. The Dayton crew did a fantastic job of planning. The specific activities brought about laughter and warmth among family members. Every year, I learned something new about the family. Every year, I learned something new about myself. Individually, we're also different, yet we're also similar. My needs, our choices, our wishes don't vary much. We all have a need to be loved and a need to be recognized, a need to be a part of something larger than ourselves. While over the years there have been disagreements or even separated relationships, we still feel the need to come together. Our envy or jealousies take a side seat to our need to share and spend time together, if only for a few moments. While we argue, debate, and disagree adamantly, we still love each other just because we are family. We may not like each other or agree with each other's choices in life. We still love each other just because. The concept of family coming together is pretty deep. Just the concept of family itself, of it coming together on a regular basis, on a regular and consistent basis, is pretty amazing. Over the years, words have been said and behaviors have been disruptive and feelings have been hurt and attitudes have not always been positive and anger has erupted. And yet we still feel the need to get together. It is about family. It is about the definition of family, which is different for all of us. I listened to stories, tales, and emotions over the weekend. Everyone took time to share, and whether with the whole group or in small impromptu groups. I listened to people reminiscing. I listened to people's embellished stories. I listened to people sharing their explanation of past actions and activities. And what is the truth? No one knows. Who cares about what the truth is? Many of the conversations shared and stories told gave life and the human side to those faces in the 1946 family photo. I learned of their strengths. I learned of their challenges. While they're not here to tell their story themselves, there are those here to tell their version or their memory of that individual. I realized this year more than ever how critical it is to record a written record, especially with older family members, before time moves on and before they move on, whether they're transitioning physically or mentally. Many of our elderly population knew the faces in that photo, and once they're no longer here or unable to share, a tenuous understanding and knowledge of my great-grandmother and her brothers and sisters will be lost. It's not about whether the memories are clear or accurate. It's about their sharing and about us recording the human side for later generations. History is always told from a different perspective than the present. We need to capture the present for the moment. This is a picture of my cousin Lydia. I recorded her talking about her family and how this came across. My grandfather Dan died in October 1990, and we were sitting in the church after the funeral, and she said to me, as I was sitting here at your granddad's funeral looking at him, I was thinking about the first time I saw him. He was 3 months old and I was 5 years old. Daddy and I went to the train station to pick him up, and Aunt Rosie coming from Pennsylvania. I went to her house and recorded her sharing her memories of knowing my grandfather, which he was her first cousin. And I've transcribed and have a video of her telling that story. This is a picture that artist Susan Kimeniffy put together for me, and she titled it The Gatewoods. This is my brother Gary and myself when we're about 3 and 4 years old, maybe 4 and 5. And my grandmother, my great-grandmother Sadie, who was one of the 10 kids of Thomas and Mary Gatewood. My grandmother, Mary, who was the daughter of Sadie. And this is a picture of Mary that was married to Thomas. And this again is my mom at age 7. And these are some story tips as far as being able to tell the stories that you want. And I'd like to leave this poem with you tonight. And the information from the slideshow will be out on when it's recorded. So you'll be able to see some of the pieces that I wasn't able to share. We are the chosen. In each family, there is one who seems called to find the ancestors, to put flesh on their bones and make them live again, to tell the family story, to feel that somehow they know and approve. Doing genealogy is not a code gathering of facts, but instead breathing life to all who have gone before. We are the storytellers of the tribe. All tribes have one. We have been called, as it were, by our genes. Those who have gone before cried out to us to tell our story. So we do. In finding them, we somehow find ourselves. And this poem was written by Della Cummins in 1943. These are some resources that I've used that you may find interesting. And tonight, I again thank you for listening. If you have questions or comments or like to know more information, you can reach out to Jeff Sherry, museum educator for the Hagen History Center. And I thank you for sharing my story with me. And Jeff, I would turn it back over to you. I know I'm pushing up on time and I apologize.
That's okay, Gwen. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk and for all of you who watched online. Gwen, let me ask you this last question. How will your work live on? Grandchildren?
Grandchildren, and even others in the family. There are other people in our family and even friends who are also researching. Sometimes we break it up, but I'm actually looking for ways to document. One of the things that I try to do for the Gatewood family reunion is every time we meet, and we meet every year with the exception of COVID, the last couple of years we've not, is to make sure I have some new facts and to make sure that it's documented and make sure that it's documented hard copy, because we all know technology is changing. And so in order to keep up with the technology of today, 50 years from now, we'd have to keep the equipment that still may not work. So I am very mindful about making sure the information moves on and we can share it.
Well, it's certainly valuable information, especially to those of your family and for others who will, and it hopefully will inspire to do the same thing you're doing. Thank you, Gwen. I appreciate your efforts and all that you've done for us. Our next talk is on Wednesday, February 16th, 2022 at 7 p.m. when Erie resident Fred Rush will discuss African-American sailors in Oliver Hazard Perry's fleet at the Battle of Lake Erie in 1813. Gwen, thank you again for presenting tonight. Thank you, Mark Swillia, for being tech support tonight there. And good night, everyone. And thank you. Good night.
Good night.